Industrial is a vague term when it comes to music. It can take and has taken many different forms all over the years, and that is probably something I have mentioned before in previous videos. It's part of the appeal. Industrial music can mean so many different things, can blend with so many other styles of music, and even in its themes, it can go places. Whether it has to do with a more serious and sinister tone of various topics such as rebellion and conflict, to give a few examples, or a series of expressions through the lens of perversion, kinks, and fetishes. Throughout the latter, there are many different approaches, and one of them that I've really enjoyed over the years comes from the German project by the name of Grausame Töchter. If you look back at the history of my channel, you'll see that this is not the first time I'm mentioning this act. With its core member being the lead vocalist and songwriter Aaron Appeal, Grausame Töchter present themes of sadomasochism in an unfiltered fashion with various other members of the alternative latex or BDSM fashion scene and great live performance acts in which I had the opportunity to see them a long time ago. And the more I think about it, this was one of the most special and intriguing performances I've got the chance to experience live so far in my life. The main thing I would hope is that they would play at least one song out of their debut, in which they didn't play not even one, which I find it to be somewhat absurd. I've talked about Grausame Töchter in a positive fashion in the past with their latest works, but the debut is the one that started it all. Mein Eigentliches Element was released in 2011 and has been my favorite thing they've ever put out. Their works after that point would feel more cohesive or more balanced the way they flow, but the messiness of the debut is what makes this really one of a kind. And this is why I made this whole introduction about industrial music and its massive capabilities, because for me, Mein Eigentliches Element is one of the prime examples of albums whose variety and stylistic acrobatics showcase a level of creativity and imagination that the next albums don't really reach to the same extent, and all of this through the lens of industrial music and BDSM imagery. And there are other things apart from the image that give this nasty, kinky feeling. The vocals, all of them being in German, evoke this dominant attitude. It is to its core, with the performance style to the instrumentation, to have this hedonistic and vulgar feeling to it. Some of the main examples you might find of the blends between BDSM and industrial, a combination that seems to work like bread and butter, is on one hand the brutal and dark approach that stems from subgenres such as rhythmic noise. We saw a great example of that with my video of Bondage Women by Aggotech, or it can be found in the Aggotech scene, more fit for the dark club setting. Mein Eigentliches Element and the rest of the catalogue of Grausame Töchter, I'd say, borders between those lines, but it's none of those things. It's catchy and danceable, but it's not really like Aggotech. It's noisy and filthy at times, but you wouldn't really call it power noise. So what do you call it exactly? You can say that it's EBM, but it's not entirely the case. Maybe synth punk, to a certain extent. You can even say that it's like Darkwave at certain points, or Electroclash could be a good descriptor due to the nature of the vocals and how they are presented. To its core, it remains the epitome of a fetish industrial album, and every other attempt on trying to put a label to it and make it fit in a specific category is just not working. And that's what I love so much about Mein Eigentliches Element. It's an album that blends lots of familiar elements, but you can't really categorize it somewhere specifically. Grausame Töchter just do their own thing. It's on a league of its own. Trying to put them on boxes, it's like a waste of time. There's quite a few things that make this like such a special experience, and unlike anything I've heard before, at least in terms of like having all of those things in one album. Some of the things that make this album stand out as an experience is the inclusion of cello in certain tracks. Yes, there's actually cello that we see making a great appearance in later albums as well. It is also used in live performances. Then there is the martial industrial aspect, something that wasn't mentioned beforehand, but it's actually the way you get introduced to the album. Untergang has this non-stop martial drumming pattern. There's the core beat of the song, and it's filled with this insane bass and all of those other crazy surrounding sounds, effects and synths that have an iconic 2000s electro-industrial aesthetic. But this martial industrial theme occurs with the very next track also, Mephisto, in which we also get this punchy rapid kick that makes it go closer to an industrial techno direction. You seem to get an understanding where this album goes, and then the third track happens, Beledikte Engel, and it's confusion once again, like where did this come from? Completely different mood, different tempo, different atmosphere, different groove. I really didn't know how to describe what I was listening to, but the closest thing you can say it is dark cabaret, which you can't even say is the most accurate description. Grausame Töchter would go with her later works to embody dark cabaret to a more apparent and straightforward sense, but this is where it really started. This album is where a lot of things started, that shifted the group to what has become, and that's why I find it so significant through their catalogue. It's a foundation, and this album for me is the way I learned that dark cabaret is a thing, so there's that. Even if it's not the prime example of what it means, and it gets clearer with later works. The rest of the album would go on to embrace the other elements that I said beforehand make their appearance on the album, such as EBM and synth punk. There is also another aspect outside of the music that makes this album so special for me, and that's the vocals. The dominant kinky attitude is on point and it works perfectly with this thick German accent. It's like a constant expressive performance of words. There is this intimidation to it, it stays with you. But the other thing I find particularly impressive is some of the usage of effects and manipulations of the vocals, which is unlike anything I've heard before. And even if this is something that also makes for some standout parts in the next works, with mine Eigentliches Element, it's like next level. There is some quirkiness that you might find with a sudden vocal range with some of those parts, which is guaranteed to catch you by surprise every time it happens when you listen to it for the first time. But there is also a lot of robotic and mechanical elements that are not unusual for industrial standards, but right there it's used for such a specific and weird fashion that I cannot point out to anything else that it reminds me of. And what's an even more impressive aspect about this album is that it doesn't stick to one bizarre vocal manipulation and uses it as its core identity to the whole album, but I would say that almost every single one of the 10 songs over here has at least one type of vocal effect that is used only once for the whole album. And that's really something else. Like, I don't think you can easily point out to albums that use different vocal effects to almost every single one of the songs and being used to that extent as well. Untergang by itself, the introduction, is a phenomenal track instrumentally, but the thing that sells it for me is the vocals, in which you have different ones for the sensual spoken word type verses and different ones for the chorus, both of them being heavily manipulated, robotic and mechanical, but in their own different ways. They're trippy, sound alien, and flow along perfectly with what the music is doing. They correspond as if they are one. And that's not all of it. When you have the word Untergang being said, there is an added layer of effect that makes the sound even more alien and somewhat more dysfunctional. It's insanely good. The other aspect about the vocals that is fascinating throughout many songs of the album is those iconic one-liners that usually present a different use of effect compared to what the rest of the song is doing and can also be filled with reverb and delay. A core example of this is Mephisto, whose vocal part works as a great distraction in comparison to the spoken word type verses, and as the song goes on it ends up having a more leading role and it makes it fit to the more different approach that we even see with the music when it reaches the second half. Same with the song Visit As Blood Fittest, with those little vocal parts serving as a great addition to the more 2000 style of Electro-Industrial and EBM that is quite fitting. Wie eine Schlange is this bizarre lullaby introduction that leads to one of the darkest and most sinister beats to this whole album, and this is where the vocals take this more alien turn and fit the mood this track is building up to. And another great example, Dark So, with this one word getting filled with effects, has this kinda quirky attitude that is fitting with the more 2000s Electroclash aesthetics, which are the strongest in this particular occasion when it comes to the instrumental, and it also feels like it's working as an additional instrument. It's this immediate distinction with the rest of the vocal performances, this range, this robotic and alienating tone that makes for such an iconic moment throughout this whole project. And Mind Messer is also a bit of a bizarre track, the way it blends its vocals with the rest of the instrumentation, especially at the beginning where we get the most standout part in my opinion. It's this collage of all of those trippy and psychedelic sounds, a wave of sound effects, almost like a cinematic experience, and then the vocals have like this heavy, hedonistic and horny attitude. It's almost hypnotic, and also, important to add, not safe for work. The other interesting thing about this track is that it's almost 12 minutes long, separated in two parts, with the second one right at the halfway point being a more dynamic and energetic approach with a faster tempo. But still, this album is really at its best when it gets so bold with its crazy vocal manipulations and how it feels like they were really meant for these kinds of instrumentals. If there is any other track that I would really highlight out of this album is Freundin. Right off the bat it becomes distinct with this cello introduction, which sounds intense, it's sort of alarming, it pumps you up like it's from a horror movie or something. Then after fading with a lot of reverb and a minimal beat, we get into one of the most furious verses to this whole album, with some buzzing synths and the synth punk aesthetic, and then it's like a complete 180 with the chorus being extremely catchy and the vocals once again having this quirky tone to them, adding tremendously to this more playful attitude that makes for some standout and distinct elements. Freundin really has some of the greatest and most iconic ideas I've heard in any Grausame Töchter song thus far. It's really special. In its majority, this album is filled with highlights, or at least moments or aspects that make certain tracks differentiate themselves of what we have in our minds as the standard formula of EBM or Electro-Industrial, for example. And this distinction is something that is the case with the rest of the albums Grausame Töchter have put out over the years in my opinion. For me their catalogue is really strong, and while certain albums seem to have a bit of a more focus on certain elements of sound than others, I wouldn't really say there is an appropriate or right place to start. You can start with any of their albums, but for me at least, it's the debut that remains the most special. It's where it all started, and in some of those elements we saw improvements, better fleshed out and more straightforward compositions, a greater understanding of ideas being presented in a certain way, but when it comes to songwriting, risks, bold ideas, creativity and imagination, the debut remains unmatched. And this is why I consider Mein Eigentliches Element to be, in my opinion, an essential. Let me know your thoughts of this album down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.